My name is Clarice, and I am 35 years old. When the message came in from my dad, I read it 3 times just to make sure my brain wasn't trying to protect me by changing the words. You're not welcome at the wedding, and don't bring that kid around anymore. That kid, my daughter, his only grandchild. The phrasing was so deliberate, so cold that it landed heavier than if he'd just said her name. It wasn't anger, it was dismissal, like we were an inconvenience they'd finally decided to remove. I didn't respond right away. I shut my phone off and sat there in silence, letting the weight of it settle. There was something final about the way it was written, like they'd been waiting for an excuse to draw a hard line, and this was simply the moment they chose. This wasn't the first time my parents had made comments about my daughter being disruptive or different, but this was the first time they'd said it outright. Don't bring her around anymore. As if she was a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. At that point, my daughter and I had been living with my uncle for 2 months. I had sold my apartment, not because I was struggling, but because I was planning carefully. I wanted to buy a house, a place that belonged to us, where I didn't have to explain our existence or brace myself for judgment over breakfast. My parents hadn't offered to take us in after the sale. My mom had said she wasn't comfortable with that situation in her house, like my child carried chaos with her instead of crayons and questions. I used to make excuses for them. I told myself they were old-fashioned, that they just needed time, that they'd come around eventually. But after that message, I stopped lying to myself. They didn't need time. They needed control. The timing made it worse. My sister had gotten engaged in the spring to a man she met at work. He was fine, polite, quiet, and my parents were thrilled. Finally, one daughter doing things the right way. Big engagement photos, expensive venue, champagne celebrations, the whole thing costs more than most people make in a year, and no one seemed particularly worried about how it would be paid for. That responsibility landed on me without a conversation, not asked, expected. I had money, didn't I? And I agreed to help. I told them from the start exactly how much I was willing to contribute. $10,000. That was it. Clear, firm. I thought that was generous. I thought it would buy some peace. Instead, the bills started rolling in like I'd signed a blank check. Dress fittings, cake tastings, venue deposits, all happening without consulting me, yet somehow attached to my name. Then they added me to a joint wedding account for transparency. What they didn't mention was that they'd already started pulling money out of it. The day I checked the balance, my stomach dropped. They'd bought a brand new car for the couple. A car with money I hadn't even agreed to give. I called my mom and she told me I was being selfish. She said I could always make more money, but my sister only had one chance to live her dream. That sentence stuck with me as if my life, my child, my future were somehow more replaceable. That night, I sat in my uncle's guest room, phone in my hand, staring at that account. Everything in it was still technically mine. They just assumed I wouldn't dare touch it, that I'd feel too guilty, too conditioned, too scared of being the bad one. So, I moved every cent back into my main account. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. I just did it. 3 days later, my uncle walked into the kitchen with a strange look on his face and asked if I'd done something to the wedding account. I nodded. He told me my sister had opened the banking app while dress shopping and started screaming in the middle of the boutique. Full meltdown. The venue deposit bounced. The planner refused their calls. The panic had begun. And I didn't lift a finger to stop it. After that, everything started unraveling at once. My parents tried to claim it was a bank error. Then they said they decided to downsize the wedding intentionally. The story kept changing, but people talk and the truth has a way of leaking out no matter how tightly you try to hold it in. My dad left a voicemail a few days later pretending none of it had happened. He didn't mention the message telling me not to come. Didn't acknowledge what they'd said about my daughter. He just said things had gotten out of hand and maybe I could help fix it. That was when I understood something important. They didn't need my help. They needed my silence. I took my daughter out for tacos that night. We ate by the lake, bundled in jackets, and she talked the whole time about a painting she was working on. It was peaceful in a way my family never was. Quiet, honest, and sitting there watching her swing her legs off the bench, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. After I moved the money back into my account, I expected an explosion. I expected screaming voicemails, threats, a dramatic family intervention. Instead, the first thing that came was silence, the kind that feels like a room full of people holding their breath while deciding which weapon to use first. 2 full days passed with nothing, but the occasional missed call from unknown numbers I didn't answer. Then my uncle started getting the calls, and that's how I learned what was really happening. He came into the kitchen one morning with his phone in his hand, and that tight look around his mouth that meant he'd just heard something he couldn't unhear. He told me my mom had called him crying, insisting there was a misunderstanding, saying I'd panicked and transferred money that wasn't mine anymore. That wording made my stomach flip. Not move my money, but stole theirs. She was already rewriting the story. I didn't call her back. I didn't argue. I let them keep talking in circles because circles are what they know. I focused on what mattered. Keeping my daughter's world steady, keeping her away from the kind of emotional turbulence my family created like it was sport. I cooked breakfast, packed her bag, helped her with a craft project on the living room floor, while my phone sat face down on the table like a sleeping animal. When I finally turned it over, the messages were stacked. My sister first, short, sharp, dripping with disbelief. "What did you do?" Then my mom. Long paragraphs about family unity and how stress makes people act irrational. Then my dad, the simplest one, the most telling. "We need to talk." We had nothing to talk about, but I needed to understand the shape of the lie they were building because I knew it wouldn't stop at the wedding account. They'd always treated my generosity like something they could claim as theirs. Now they were going to act like my boundaries were betrayal. So I asked my uncle to tell me everything he'd heard, every detail, every excuse, every version of the story. He didn't like being in the middle, but he also wasn't blind. He told me my sister had been dress shopping at a boutique in the city, standing on one of those small velvet pedestals in front of a mirror big enough to show you every flaw you didn't know you had, wearing a $6,000 gown she hadn't paid for yet, but already treated like property. The fitter was pinning the hem when the venue called. They hadn't received the final payment. Their policy was strict. No money, no date, no exceptions. The reservation was canceled. The next Saturday available wasn't until the following year. My sister didn't cry. She screamed. She dropped the phone, yelled so loudly people stopped in the hallway, and then stormed out barefoot, still half-dressed like she could outrun the consequences. My mom followed her into the street trying to calm her down, while my sister shouted that I'd stolen her wedding money and ruined her life. Someone recorded it. Of course they did. There's always someone with a phone when a woman in bridal underlays is losing her mind on the sidewalk. That footage didn't make it to me, but I didn't need it. I could see it in my head too clearly. I could hear my sister's voice saying the same words she'd been using since we were teenagers. The ones she'd always relied on because they worked. Clarice is dramatic. Clarice is jealous. Clarice is unstable. The same labels they loved because it meant they never had to look at their own behavior. What I couldn't stop thinking about was the car. A brand new car bought with money from an account that had my name on it. Money I had never approved beyond my initial contribution. My parents had justified it to themselves the way they justify everything by turning my resources into family property and my boundaries into selfishness. They had moved like I was too predictable to push back, like I would grumble and then comply because that's what I'd always done. They were counting on guilt, counting on me staying quiet because my daughter was watching and I didn't want drama near her. They had forgotten one thing. Being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. The next day, my dad left a voicemail that made my skin prickle. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't even mention the message he'd sent banning me from the wedding. He spoke like a man trying to smooth over a small inconvenience. He said things had gotten a little out of hand, and they were in a jam, and maybe I could help fix it. The tone was almost warm, like he was buttering me up for an ask he assumed I'd say yes to. I listened all the way through without moving. When it ended, I didn't call back. I took my daughter to the park instead. She ran toward the swings, hair flying, laughing in that way kids do when they haven't been taught to shrink yet. I sat on a bench and watched her, feeling something loosen inside me. My parents used to tell me I was too sensitive. My sister used to tell me I was too intense. But watching my daughter take up space in the world, I realized the truth. They weren't afraid of my sensitivity or intensity. They were afraid of my refusal to be controlled. Later that evening, my uncle got another call from my dad and put it on speaker without warning me first. I heard my dad's voice fill the kitchen, the way it always did when he wanted to sound reasonable while being cruel. He asked my uncle to mediate. He said families don't function like this. He said I was hurting everyone. He said I was punishing my sister for a misunderstanding. My uncle didn't let him finish. He told my dad flat and clear that families also don't treat one child like garbage and call their grandchild that kid like she's a stain. He said they were reaping what they'd sown. He said I wasn't obligated to fund a wedding that was being built on disrespect and entitlement. My dad went quiet, not remorseful, just shocked like he couldn't believe someone had said it out loud. That night, I sat in the guest room again with my laptop open, going through the numbers with the calm focus of someone who has finally decided not to be manipulated. The joint account was drained on their side, and the rest of the planned expenses were still sitting like a bomb waiting to go off. Venue, rentals, catering, hair, and makeup, the long list of vendors they'd booked without confirming they could pay. The wedding was 4 weeks away. They thought I would cave. They didn't understand that the money had never been the point. It was the disrespect, the way my daughter was spoken about, the way they expected me to fund everything while being treated like an inconvenience. And now, with the car already bought, the venue slipping away, and my sister's dream collapsing, I could feel the panic building behind their silence. Something was coming. By the second week after I moved the money, the silence turned frantic. Not toward me at first, toward everyone else. Extended families started calling my uncle, not to ask how I was doing, but to ask what was happening. The invitations had already gone out. Flights were booked, hotels reserved. People were whispering that something was wrong because the wedding that had once been paraded like a luxury brand launch was suddenly unraveling at the seams. The dress was the first real casualty. The boutique didn't wait. They had a policy and they enforced it without emotion. My sister missed the final payment deadline by less than 24 hours, and the gown was released to another bride who paid in full. When my sister showed up the next day, convinced she could cry her way through it, the receptionist didn't budge. According to my uncle, my sister screamed so loudly in the parking lot that someone called security. My mom arrived with a smoothie and a pill, and together they framed it as an attack, not a consequence. The venue followed. My dad tried everything. He called, he begged, he blamed me. At one point, he even suggested I'd hacked the account, but the coordinator had receipts, timestamps, emails, and zero interest in drama. The estate was rebooked within 48 hours. Someone else's dream wedding replaced theirs on the same date, under the same chandelier my sister had taken photos under weeks earlier. After that, it became an avalanche. The DJ wasn't paid. The cake designer blocked them. The wedding planner stopped answering calls and then posted a story about learning to vet clients better before going private. It was quiet humiliation, the worst kind, because there was no one to yell at. My parents tried to control the narrative. First, it was a bank error. Then, it was a deliberate choice to downsize. Then, it was a spiritual shift toward intimacy. They posted a filtered photo of a candle with a caption about new beginnings. No one believed it. People noticed. People always do. Cousins asked why the wedding had moved from a lakeside estate to a banquet hall next to a strip mall. Someone commented on social media. Hope they didn't use Clarice's money for that new car. The comment wasn't deleted. It just sat there unanswered like an accusation no one wanted to confirm. The final invitations went out a week later. They weren't really invitations. They were cheap printouts, generic font, no return address, no elegance, no warmth. A vague message about a private family celebration at a venue no one had heard of. My uncle got one. My cousin Amber got one. Even my dad's old boss got one. I didn't. Neither did my daughter. That wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. A final attempt to erase us while blaming us for everything that went wrong. It didn't hurt. It clarified. They needed a villain. Someone to explain why the fantasy collapsed. And I made it easy by refusing to participate. Then came the twist I didn't expect. 2 days later, my uncle told me my sister's fiancé's parents wanted to talk. I assumed they were coming to defend their son, maybe to pressure me, maybe to lecture me about family unity. Instead, they showed up with a manila envelope and an expression that said they wish they'd never been pulled into this mess. They didn't make small talk. They said everything they knew about the situation came from my parents and my sister. They were told I pulled out of the wedding out of spite, that I was unstable, jealous, trying to sabotage things. But the truth had started to surface, and it didn't line up with the story they'd been fed. The groom had found out about the wedding account, about the money, about the car, about how much I'd actually contributed. My sister had never told him. She'd framed it as emotional unreliability. Said it was better if I wasn't involved. When he confronted her, she admitted it. She said she wanted the wedding to be about her, that if I was around, it would become about Clarice and her baggage. Her baggage. My daughter. The words landed like ice. The fiancé's parents slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. They said they knew it wasn't enough. They weren't trying to erase what happened. They just didn't want their son's marriage to begin with a lie hanging over it. I didn't touch the check. I asked one question. Does your son still want to marry her? They exchanged a look. Then the mother said quietly, we're not sure. That night, I sat on the floor with my daughter while she worked on a craft project, glue on her fingers, humming to herself. She asked if the new house would have a garden. I told her yes, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't looking back. The wedding happened that Saturday. I didn't go. I didn't watch videos. I didn't ask for updates. They came anyway. The banquet hall was fluorescent lit and smelled faintly of disinfectant from a funeral that had ended earlier that day. Folding chairs, discount tablecloths, artificial flowers that looked reused, no dancing, a playlist on someone's phone that kept cutting out. During a toast, the groom's brother tried to make a joke. Something about how the bride knew how to get what she wanted, even if someone else paid the price. The room went silent. My sister laughed too loudly and raised her glass. Hey, I'm not the one raising a charity case. No music, no cover. The groom stood up, set his drink down, and walked out. He didn't come back. Guests started leaving. Cupcakes sat untouched. Someone muttered, well, this was a mistake, and walked out with their spouse. The next morning, my phone filled with screenshots and messages I didn't respond to. The groom had packed a bag and left town. No marriage certificate was filed. No honeymoon happened. The car sat in the driveway, shiny and accusing. My sister posted a black background story with white text about heartbreak and betrayal. No apology, no ownership. For once, I didn't say a word. The truth did the work for me. After the wedding imploded, the noise didn't stop right away. It just changed tone. The frantic calls turned into whispers. The public outrage softened into private embarrassment. My parents didn't apologize. They recalibrated. That had always been their skill. When a story stopped working, they didn't fix it, they replaced it. My mom posted photos from a rented lake house a few days later. Filters heavy, smiles stiff. The caption read something about a reset with real family. It got 6 likes, all from people who hadn't been around long enough to know what had really happened. My dad stayed quiet online, which was new. Silence from him usually meant things were worse than anyone realized. My sister disappeared for a while. No posts, no updates, no vague quotes about resilience. That was how I knew she was spiraling. She only went quiet when she ran out of angles. Meanwhile, the truth kept leaking out anyway. One aunt canceled her return flight early. A cousin messaged me privately to say she was sorry and that she hadn't known things were that bad. Another relative sent a screenshot of a comment left under a photo of the new car. I hope they didn't use Clarice's money for that. The comment stayed up. No one defended it. No one deleted it. My uncle was furious in a way I'd never seen before. He stopped trying to be polite. He went straight into the family logistics chat my mom had created and wrote one line. So, your granddaughter isn't good enough to be in the same room as you now. Then he left the chat. My mom left immediately after. My dad didn't respond. No one else said a word. That was when the shift happened. The narrative my parents had tried to control started to fracture. Not because I spoke up, but because too many people saw the inconsistencies for themselves. You can spin a story when only one person knows the truth. You can't spin it when the evidence is parked in your driveway and the groom walks out of his own reception. 2 days later, my sister's former in-laws came back, this time without the envelope. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't offer comfort. They simply said they were sorry my daughter had been spoken about the way she was. The mother's voice cracked when she said it. She said she'd raised her children to be better than that. Then they left, and I knew that whatever marriage might have existed was already over. That night, my sister sent a single email. No greeting, no apology, just a subject line that read, "From one woman to another." Inside, she wrote about reclaiming our bond, about how families fall apart when misunderstandings aren't addressed, about how she hoped we could move forward because family is forever. She ended with a list. Venue balance, rentals, catering, hair and makeup, just over $19,000. She asked if I could help with one last thing, promised she'd never ask again. I forwarded the email to my uncle. He called me 10 minutes later, laughing so hard he could barely get words out. Apparently, my mom had shown up at his house uninvited earlier that day to try the same angle. She told him the wedding being canceled would stain the family name. He told her the only stain was how they treated me and my daughter. After that, she stopped showing up. The invitations to the cozy gathering went out. Cheap paper, free template, no lace, no trim, no warmth. My uncle got one. Amber got one. My dad's former boss got one. We didn't. It was the final confirmation I didn't need. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted obedience. And they'd lost it. 3.5 weeks after the disaster they still tried to call a wedding, I signed the papers. No fanfare, no champagne, just a quiet office, a stack of documents, and my name printed exactly where it belonged. I closed on the house on a Tuesday morning. The kind of day that doesn't announce itself as important until later. When you look back and realize everything changed right there. It wasn't huge. It wasn't flashy. But it was mine. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen window that caught the morning light just right. A fenced yard with an old maple tree that leaned a little to the left, like it had stories to tell. The first thing my daughter did when we walked through the door was run down the hallway, open every door, and declare the smallest room hers. She said she wanted to turn it into a sun lab, which I didn't ask her to explain. She said we needed a wind chime. We bought 3. My uncle helped carry the last box up the porch steps. When my daughter unlocked the front door herself and yelled, "We're home," something in my chest finally exhaled. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The feeling was deeper than that. It was relief mixed with certainty. This wasn't borrowed space. This wasn't temporary. This was a beginning. I never told my parents we bought the house. They found out anyway. My uncle sent them a picture without asking me first. Me and my daughter standing on the porch, keys in our hands, smiling like we'd just escaped something heavy. I didn't know he'd done it until he showed me my mom's reply. How convenient. No congratulations, no curiosity, just bitterness wrapped in punctuation. 2 days later, she posted a filtered photo of a rented lake house with a caption about resetting with real family. It got 6 likes, all from people who hadn't been around long enough to know better. My sister stayed silent. No posts, no stories, no quotes. According to Amber, she'd tried calling her fiancé late one night, crying, saying they could still make it official. He didn't answer. His cousin did. She told her flatly that he wasn't coming back. Whatever ceremony, they hadn't even been legally filed. No marriage certificate, no honeymoon, just a shiny car sitting in the driveway, paid for with money that had burned a hole straight through their fantasy. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't gloat. I just kept building my life. I painted the kitchen cabinets a soft green. I replaced the ugly ceiling fan in the dining room. I let my daughter pick a ridiculous chandelier for her room that turned it into what she proudly called a fairy disco. Slowly, every corner of the house started to feel like us. Not a compromise, not a peace offering, a home. A few weeks later, I hosted a housewarming. Nothing formal, no printed invitations, just texts to people who mattered. My uncle came. Amber and her husband brought fresh bread and a bottle of wine. A couple of neighbors I'd started talking to showed up with smiles and stories. The backyard lights glowed softly while kids ran through the grass, and music played low enough that no one had to shout to be heard. At one point, I looked around and realized something that stopped me cold. Every single person there had chosen to be in my life. Not because of obligation, not because of guilt, not because I paid their way. No one asked about the wedding. No one mentioned my parents. No one brought up my sister. It was like that chapter had quietly sealed itself and refused to bleed into this one. Later, after everyone left and my daughter was asleep, I sat on the porch with my uncle. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Finally, he broke the silence. "You built this from nothing," he said. "You know that, right?" I did. I knew it in my bones. I remembered every night I lay awake wondering if I'd ever get out. Every phone call that ended in guilt. Every moment I let them make me small to keep the peace. Every time they looked at my daughter like she was a problem instead of a gift. Now, here we were out of reach, unapologetic. I know they saw the photos. The porch, the lights, the people laughing, the caption I wrote under one picture. "Home finally." They didn't like it. They didn't comment. But I know they felt it. And part of me hopes it burned. Not out of spite, but out of truth. Because for years they treated my generosity like a resource and my silence like consent. Watching me build something they couldn't touch must have been unbearable. My sister never apologized. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. The relatives who once defended her started pulling away quietly. Invitations stopped. Conversations cooled. Even the people who used to excuse her behavior stopped returning calls. It turns out cruelty is easier to overlook when someone's winning. When they're not, it stands out. I didn't correct the story she told. I didn't fight the version of events my parents clung to. I didn't chase closure. I didn't need it. Closure came the first night I slept in my own house. Windows open, my daughter breathing softly down the hall, and no voice in my head telling me I owed someone something. People ask me later if it hurt to lose my family. I tell them the truth. I didn't lose a family. I lost a system built on control, guilt, and quiet exploitation. What I kept was my dignity. What I kept was my child's peace. What I kept was a future that belonged to us and no one else. My name is Clarice. And they didn't push me out.